So let's talk about today's webinar. Let me introduce today's wonderful panelists. We have two great guests for you. First is Shawna Erdmann, Senior Vice President of Learning at Comcast. Hi, Shawna. Thanks for popping on video there. And Melanie Davis, she is the Chief Learning Officer at Ford Motor Company. Hi, Melanie. Thank you for popping on with us. Today's conversation will be facilitated, as always, by our co-founder and CEO, Dr. David Rock. David, are you there? It looks like I can see you. Can we hear you? Not quite yet.
Yes, can you hear me okay now?
There we are. Perfect. Thank you.
Should be a German word for thinking you're on mute, off mute, and you're not. Sure there is. It's very long. Great to be with you all, Shawna and Melanie. So great to be with you. Thanks for making time. I know you guys are running very busy organizations and lots to do, so we really appreciate your attention and focus. I'm going to share about between 10 and 15 minutes of research and kind of gather insights from people. We've got some new questions for folks who've been following us. And then I'm going to bring each of you on one at a time. So feel free to go on video and audio mute, and then we'll bring you back. But thanks so much for being here. Great to have you. So folks, it's great to be back with you. I know we've had thousands and thousands of people. I think we worked out about 10,000 people watched the last one, either live or the same week or on LinkedIn or on the podcast now. So we appreciate getting this message out to everyone. No pressure, Shawna and Melanie. But it's been an incredible time. We've been collecting some data. We've been talking a lot about threat level. If you're new to this, I'll give you a super quick synopsis. But essentially, in a crisis, you have to think really deeply, and your ability to think deeply is inversely proportional to your threat level. The more threatened and anxious you feel, the harder it is to think deeply. And so we've been talking about the 3 levels of threat from the research on how the brain processes threat. And level 1 is fine if it's just level 1, but 1.46, basically 1.5, from 1,400 talent execs think they're managers of that. That's pretty high, but it's kind of okay. But the number 1.85 concerns me. That's what over 1,300 talent execs thought that frontline employees are at from their own data and insight and everything. But that's close to 2, and a level 2 threat is really bad for, start off with immune system, mental health, but also just, poor perception, poor decision-making, poor judgment, poor social cognition, terrible creativity. It's quite an issue. And so this, we've been collecting data from some of you. Thanks for sharing. And this is kind of the summary. So it's actually on the positive side, not as bad as I thought it was, which is good, but still, not great. And I'll just throw another piece in there. People are universally pretty bad at asking for help. So I also think that talent executives don't really know how badly people are doing because they're not telling them. Frontline are not sharing that, I think, as much as they could be. We've also been looking at productivity. Only a bit over 300 respondents so far, but 70% finding working from home the same or more productive, 70%. I think you saw, many of you saw the Gallup study, 60% of people want to stay working from home. Some interesting dilemmas and interesting challenges there. We're not going to dig so much into that today, a little bit, but this is some early data that we're starting to share. I want to ask you a few questions. Let's get this in a poll format. We've been doing this in the insider events, and we've sort of seen some themes. And I want to put a poll up. The first question is, how has your organization most positively surprised you? You'll actually, that's a typo. It's not 3 bullets or less. It's just pick one. So pick one of those that's kind of most surprised you out of the things on screen there. I know we've got hundreds of folks on the line, so we'd love to get lots and lots of feedback from this. How has your organization most surprised you? Just pick the one that's kind of been the most surprising, most positive to you. Then we've got 150 people. Let's get some more. How has your organization most positively surprised you? We've got 3 quick polls. Try and do them quickly, and then we can get into the awesome stuff. Okay, let's close that off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. Let's close it off. 175 people. Look at those numbers. Interesting. The flexibility, ability to work from home. We've heard from hundreds of companies saying, we thought this would take 1.5 years. We did it in 2 days. And we never thought the company would accept it, but it's happened. The speed and openness to rapid change is another interesting one. That's been surprising. And I think that's challenged a lot of people to think differently. Like, hey, if we could do this, what else could we do? If we could do this, what else could we do, right? interesting question. I'll come back to that. We've got some thoughts on that. Let's go to the next one. It sort of links to it. What's the magic you most want to maintain? So if there's one thing you could like really, really do and really kind of build into your culture, what's the one thing you really want to maintain most? You probably want to maintain all of it. I'm sure you want all of it, but what's the biggest one? See, we've got 75 coming in. Let's keep going. We've got 100. Feel like an auctioneer suddenly. 130. Let's keep going. What's the one biggest thing you want to maintain? What's the magic you want to maintain? Let's keep going. And let's close it off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, close it off. Thank you, 188 people. What do we got here? The human first. Interesting. And then the flexibility around working from home. Actually, those are similar things. Those are both human first. And speed and agility. Wow, 7%. Like you want that, but nowhere near as much as the human first connection. That's fascinating. Really, really interesting. Thank you. Wow, I think that's what we know what next week's session's about. Thanks everyone. We're gonna dig into that a lot more. It's clearly the biggest thing people really want to maintain. Fascinating. Let's go to the next question. What's been your biggest success in helping people be okay at the moment? It's been the biggest success in helping people be okay. Is that the next question? We got another poll coming up.
Hi, David. This is Erin. We were going to do that as a parallel process in the chat.
Oh, that's right. You got me. Thank you. Been a big week. Great. So thanks very much, everyone, on the polls. Thanks, Erin. So it's really interesting, the magic you want to maintain. Does anyone want to just put, some comments in the chat as well? I'm going to take a look at the chat about that topic, like the topic of, making organizations more human, like kind of, how's that coming up for you? What are you seeing? What does it look like? Let's just get some comments. What does that look like? Empathy and vulnerability check-ins, showing our humanity. Check-in and patience, wellness training. Yeah, what does it look like to really accept that? It's been very meaningful, hasn't it? Very moving, very meaningful to be able to do that stuff. Fantastic. Thanks very much, everyone. All right, so we've been thinking a lot about kind of what's going on right now, obviously. We think a lot at NLI, we think a lot about thinking, and we think a lot about helping other people with their thinking. And in particular, we've been thinking a lot about how difficult it is to think for everyone at the moment. There's a lot of thinkings. And so we've started to see part of the challenge is a construal level issue and a distance bias issue. So right now, there's some stuff to do day to day. So firstly, this is the context for here is how do we build a better normal, right? How do we, as heads of talent, talent executives overall, how do we build a better normal, not a new normal, a better normal? How do we use this crisis, right? So there's some day-to-day stuff. Now we think about like buffers for you. You've got to put in place the buffers for you to stay okay, especially as a leader, right? You never want to get below level 1 threat. The signals to others, sending those scarf signals. And then you also need the systems that create positive scarf experiences for people as well. So there's a lot of work going on to the stay okay. Like personally, we're all putting a lot of time into just staying okay and helping our team stay okay. It's getting a little easier, but there's still a lot of focus on that. And the solution we built called Focus directly addresses this and starts to go a little bit into the second chunk, but directly addresses this. If you're from an organization, haven't seen that, we can give you a free place to actually experience that in an open program as well. And then I'm gonna go to the second chunk here then. And this is like separately, and I think that one of the challenges, this is kind of midterm, and this is stuff to over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, who knows? But I think a large number of people are going to be working from home for a long time. That's probably a reasonable bet. A large number of people will focus, for a long time. And I think we've got to, the challenge with this is it's a different level of control. It's not like this week. Some of it is like Zoom, better Zoom meetings this week. But we think there's kind of 3 levels of control. They're your work practices. Like, let me throw one at you. If people are working 10, 12 hours a day, they probably should work 4 days a week to get the recovery time of a long weekend, right? Either every week or every second week. You probably, if you did a control study and got 1,000 people and tried this every week, 1,000 people tried it every second week, 1,000 people tried it the same, and then looked at the data, you'd be doing the responsible thing. And I think you'd be surprised that probably the most productive and effective people are working 4 days really intensely. But that's a guess. It's not science guessing. But I would recommend like really thinking about work practice like that and actually doing some quick experiments and trying things. So I think it's time to like reinvent work practices to make things more sustainable. Also reinvent the schedules. For example, no virtual meetings before noon, especially Monday, Tuesday. Let people actually produce things when their brains are the quietest. No virtual meetings Monday, Tuesday. Try to minimize them if you can the rest of the week, and focus on lunchtime onward. And then also the actual meetings. We've got a ton of insight on how to make your actual Zoom meetings dramatically shorter and more effective. And that's going to be absolutely critical to make work from home sustainable. So we've been thinking a lot about work practices, schedules, meetings. We've developed a briefing on that we're going to start to offer free to organizations to really like think about that second chunk from the science. And then the third chunk, and this is the big one, this is like, how do we leverage the moment, right? And how do we actually like rethink work, right? Not just rebuild culture and learning, but like reimagine work, right? With this moment. Now I want to throw something controversial out there. I don't think we have more than 3 to 6 months to do that. I think we've got the momentum right now, and I think it's going to be gone in 6 months to do big things. And the challenge is that stuff's longer term, so it's never going to feel as important or as close, right, as number 1 and 2. So if you're not putting in like, if you're not like putting in the attention and time and energy on that, it's going to be a problem. So a quick question: do we have a poll for this, Erin? I'm not sure if we did a poll for this, so we can put something in the chat. Just kind of what's the weighting, what's the balance before we go to Shawna?
We do have a poll, David.
Yeah, let's throw a poll up. What's like, where do you find yourself now putting most of your attention? Where do you find yourself now putting most of your attention? On leverage the moment, on making work from home sustainable, on staying okay? Where's most of your attention going now? Well, it's exciting to see lots of you thinking about leveraging the moment. That's good news. Fantastic. Let's get a few more in. We've got 175. What are we going to do to move things through? So, all right, let's close that off in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's close it off. Fantastic. So out of everyone here, about 18% focus most on staying okay, 34% on making work from home sustainable. The biggest is actually leverage the moment. I'm surprised by that. That's good news though. I was concerned people were not thinking about that enough, but it seems like they are, which is excellent news. Thanks very much, Erin, for that, and everyone. So, with that as a kind of context and some of that language, let's bring in our first guest. Shawna, great to have you here. Thanks for making time.
Sure, good. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, first question on everyone's lips, really important question, is the internet gonna keep together, or are we gonna really freak out?
Isn't it amazing how we have really put it to the test, and it is held up and done a really good job. I know, and of course, I am a Comcast customer, and I'm sure many folks are who are in our footprint. I have 4 kids, and we have multiple Zoom meetings going on for school, and I'm online, and so we are testing it, and it's held up incredibly well. So I'm super proud.
Bless you and everyone at Comcast for maintaining essential services.
Thanks for letting me get a little plug in there. Appreciate it.
Yeah, fantastic. Bless you for that. So let's shift gears a bit. I want to just kind of help everyone have a chance to learn about kind of what's been most useful to you, because we've all been doing incredible work. I know every company we've spoken to has been doing heroic things, but we're all curious about what's been sort of most effective, So first of all, like, what's been most effective in terms of helping people through this, helping your employees? I know there's a lot, right? But on average, what's been the biggest thing that you've found? And tell us a story about that.
So I think there have been several things. I mean, as everyone has lived over the past couple of months, there's been a push to work from home, and how do you actually do that in a thoughtful and meaningful way where folks are feeling safe and are able to be productive. So we have thousands and thousands of people that we've moved from office buildings and call centers to be able to work from home. I think the communication has probably been the biggest key for us, being really deliberate and thoughtful about making sure that folks know why, what we're doing, what the process is, and it's giving them that certainty of knowing what to expect. And then the consistency of the messaging and the communication, I think, has been really key for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said the why. So we've been thinking about the challenges of communication right now. And we think about kind of 5 levels of focus in any interaction. There's there's the vision, which is like why you're doing something. And there's actually a network in the brain for that. There's a network in the brain that lights up when you're thinking about why you're doing something. That's actually quite positive, quite abstract. And that's separate to the network for how you're going to do it, like the plan, which is kind of more about timing and a little bit more concrete in the brain. And there's a separate network for the doing, the detail. And then there's a network for when it doesn't work, which is problems. And then there's a network for level 3 threat, which is when it all falls to, heck. And I think people have been really down the bottom of that with problem and drama, right? And then, detail, problem, trade. And when you lift up to the why, it reconnects them back to the positive, also creates shared goals between people, right? And creates more certainty and more autonomy. So it's really, really useful. I think that's been one of the things we've been trying to teach people is like start every meeting with reconnecting to why you're doing something, where you are in the plan, what's going on, to lift them up. Also just because everyone's frazzled from, so much. So anyway, back to you.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Starting with why is so important. And there's so many other pressures in the environment from folks trying to manage their home lives and what's happening with their families and extended families and trying to manage their own work from home life. And I love what you said earlier about the human side of it. And that's been a really big thing. You have connections with folks at work, and when you're able to connect and see somebody, a leader or a colleague or a team member within their own home and in their home office, and kids sometimes pop in or their pet, and you really are able to connect in a different way. And I think that's been fun to have that relatedness and that connection when otherwise we're so incredibly isolated. So I've been grateful for the video.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's been really meaningful. I'm just going to turn my air conditioning off. It's a bit noisy. It got hot, then it got noisy. I'm celebrating the first day of air conditioning in New York.
It's so exciting.
Exciting. Thank you, Lord. Summer coming. Anyway, it's been really interesting. So, in the crisis, certainty's plummeted, right? Thinking from a scarf perspective, certainty's plummeted, autonomy's plummeted, sense of control. And our normal go-to in a crisis is relatedness. Like literally we calm our nervous system when things are really uncertain by, hanging out together, right? And we haven't had to do that. And I think it's left such a void that leaders of smart leaders, the perceptive leaders have stepped in and said, wow, we need to create like a strong team, a strong sense of we're in it together, as opposed to maybe a week earlier when the leader was always like leading through status, right? Always leading through, you have to listen to me, I'm a different person. And like within a week, like, here's my pets, here's my crisis,
so
here's my disaster. We're all here, right? And it was just such a flip from leading through status through leading through relatedness. It was really
simple. And it feels good to know that I don't have to be perfect. And I think that's a huge, it's like a huge leveling of the playing field and being able to then share ideas or feel comfortable talking about something that you might have been worried about or had some trepidation around in the past. That I know you're dealing with figuring out how you're going to feed your family tonight. And, I hear your dog barking or whatever is happening to go on in your life. And I know I can relate to you in that certain way. And it just brings more of a realness and a humanness to the workplace that I think was not, maybe in some cases not there.
Yeah, it wasn't there in many places. It's been really inspiring. There's a whole lot of interesting research on that. When you feel like you've got a shared goal with a team, you actually can literally experience pain, like higher levels of pain before you have to say that's too much. And it really does help in a crisis to go through that. The other question I have is just, maybe you're already answering it, but what's been most inspiring to you, about, over the last few months at Comcast or broadly? What's been most inspiring?
I'm still new here. And so I'm about 6 months in. And I think what has struck me even from before this crisis is the way our teammates come together to support one another. And when this crisis hit us, I think it just strengthened the bonds that our teammates have for one another and the way that they can help. I mean, by no means it was easy, and there are definitely challenges that we have on a daily basis. But I think that the inspirational piece is that we know that we have support. We know we have folks that are willing to help and chip in. And I think also what's amazing right now is we have this ability to be really innovative. And I think there's a much higher appetite for others to say, gosh, that just might work. You know, whereas before there may have been a lot more, it might take a little bit longer, or there might not have been as big of an appetite to dig in and try something new. So I think that's been inspiring as well, that you can really explore new areas. There's more of a willingness to say, yeah, let's make that work. And how can we do that instead of, the opposite?
Right. I've been thinking about this a bit, sort of riffing on this, that, companies universally did incredible things in like 2 or 3 days that if you'd asked them a week before, they would have said, that's 3 months minimum, a year, whatever. And kind of how do we hold on to some of that? And we don't want to hold on to the, abject terror we all felt that drove it. But I think there are some variables that drove it, like everyone in the whole company focused on one thing for just like a short period. I think that, if you could make something everyone's priority, just like for a week, I think companies could do really big things. I think there's a lesson there. Sort of how do you do that?
Absolutely. And I just double down on that and say we did. And when we had to move all of our folks who were supporting to make sure that we were able to have internet, and if there were challenges that we were able to move on those and take calls from our customers, we were able to shift that and do all of our training, for instance, that we had for frontline, shift it all to a digital format in a matter of a week or two.
Right.
Was an amazing accomplishment. And before, I think we probably would have said, oh, that's gonna be a long project. That's gonna take us a long time. But when you have to, you find a way. And when everyone stacks hands and says, yep, we're on it, we all believe in it, we know why we're doing it, it gets done. And it's amazing how fast something can get done when you are all focused.
And I think it's something about the priority level. Like what happens is you can have a project, and for the project team, it's their number 1 priority. The people around them might be number 3, and for other folks, it might be number 27. And so it just keeps hitting like roadblocks. Whereas if everyone, even for like a day, right, 2 days, whatever, even an hour sometimes, like if everyone made this the number 1 priority, like all this stuff moves. And
it's clarity too, right? Clarity on what you should deliver, and you're ruthless about that for a period of time. Right. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, let's actually, it'd be nice to ask people in the online and the chat, just, what's the one thing that's been most inspiring to you online? And we'll get your comments in the chat. I know there's going to be hundreds probably, but I'd love to hear from folks. What's been most inspiring to you in your organization, particularly around people? Fantastic. That's a great background. Stay with us, Shawna. I'm going to bring Melanie in. We're going to kind of hear her inspiring stuff. Then we're going to bring both of you together to talk about like, so what for learning now? What are we going to do with learning now? We'll have a great conversation. But while we sort of make that transition, folks, put in the chat what's been most inspiring to you. Thanks very much, Shawna. Melanie, great to have you with us.
Thanks, great to be here.
And firstly, how's the whiplash from like building cars to like sewing PPP? And of course, thank you for doing that. But like, how is that experience up there at Ford?
This is one of the things that Ford has been known for is they are here to help, right? And the first question that is always on someone's lips is, how can we take what we have and do something for others with it? How do we help our nation through this crisis? And so it's been really amazing. I'm newer to Ford too, but it's been really amazing to see how quickly that was the first reaction. And they were like, how do we turn around and do good here? So
yeah, that's great to hear. It's an old company, right? How many years has it been around?
Over 100. Right. So yeah, very old company. Has seen a few evolutions of the world in the last 100 years. Yeah. And
so similar questions. The first one is like, what do you think has been most helpful at Ford? Like the number 1 thing in terms of helping people through this crisis? What's really helped? Like if you could say to hundreds of companies, hey, focus on this one thing really well, what would that be?
So I have to echo the communication that we have from our senior leaders has been really great. They've been hosting a weekly huddle with all of our top leadership team to talk about how we are doing as people, as well as how the business is doing, as well as how we're helping kind of the world. And just being able to connect through those experiences. They include a Q&A with the whole company during that. In the most recent one that happened yesterday, they showed this video about working from home, this music video, Stockholm Syndrome, which had us all laughing together, which is great. And a lot of times the topics are based on, we do a weekly kind of pulse to the company that says, hey, how are you? What's going on? Are things going better or worse than they were last week? How can we support you? Our talent analytics team does that. And so they're very responsive to kind of keeping a pulse on the workforce.
Yeah, amazing. I was thinking about you saying about the impact you're having. When you know that your work has a pro-social impact, like helps other humans, it becomes deeply rewarding. Like knowing that fact really creates a strong reward response. And I think that's an important thing for leaders to keep reminding their companies, whether you're making PPP or whatever you're doing, you're helping in some way. Because I think folks overall are actually stuck in quite a negative state. And it's really easy to forget the positive impact, and just, reminding them of that lifts them out of that threat state quite a lot. But that's great to hear. The communication has been the most helpful. And what's been most inspiring to you at Ford? What's the thing that's really kind of inspired you about the organization, what they're doing, and what you're doing in talent?
So obviously it's extremely inspiring what our manufacturing team is doing with PPE. So that's in the news. I'll talk about what I get to see internally. So what I've been super inspired about as a learning leader is seeing everyone shift to growth mindset immediately. So things that were impossible or would take, as you said before, would take 3 to 6 months to do. Those barriers are no longer there, and it's all possibility thinking. And so I think that's been most inspiring. Yeah.
Right. Fantastic. Growth mindset. I know we've worked with you at a couple of organizations before. We've rolled out growth mindset work, some interesting places. I've definitely noticed a trend that some of the organizations that really embedded growth mindset are adapting fast and doing fantastically. And one of those, for example, let's call Microsoft out. Microsoft doing incredibly well, all because of us, of course. But no, but they've heavily invested in growth mindset the last few years based on our work. And I think just people kind of being ready to experiment and know that experiment's okay. Being willing to just constantly improve, not try to just always prove that they're okay, and then just constantly get better rather than look good. It's this dynamic of look good versus get better. How important do you think growth mindset is for the road ahead?
Oh my gosh, it's critical. I mean, even without what's going on right now with the pandemic, obviously growth mindset is what's going to take any company from where they are today to where they need to be as rapidly, of course, as they need to get there. And I think one of the biggest things that this pandemic is allowing growth mindset to kind of come into the ether of the community is we no longer have the same amount of time to prevent failure. And so because we can't prevent failure because we don't know what's happening and we've never done this before and we have to do it right now, we don't get distracted by all the fear that goes into that, which allows us to really seek, and try things new and truly experiment without fear.
Yeah. And I think it's very much a habit that can be embedded. We've been doing a lot of research on growth mindset. We actually just published another study on it. Maybe folks can put that in, my team can put that in the chat. Just in the last few weeks, we published like a 3rd or 4th industry research piece on growth mindset. It's such a, as we're studying it, because we're sort of becoming anthropologists as well as neuroscientists, we're putting stuff into literally hundreds of thousands of people, actually millions now every year. And we're kind of studying. And I think, with growth mindset, it's literally the number of times a week you notice a fixed mindset and you say, oh, interesting. And you shift to a growth mindset. Whether it's adding the word yet, right? Which I know we worked on it like 100,000 people, in the past, but I think the critical factor is kind of just every week, how many times a week do you notice that fixed mindset and go, ooh, how do we shift to a growth? But then I think at a systems level, there's a lot about really encouraging experimentation, supporting it, allowing it, and really valuing learning as a critical factor. So fascinating time. We're doing a ton of work in that space, but I know it's a really interesting experience. What do you think is next? What are you thinking about the road ahead? How are you thinking about the road ahead at Ford, and what are you excited by?
So I think I'll speak specifically in my capacity as the chief learning officer. I think what's really next, and sorry, I don't know if you can hear it's trash day apparently. What's really next step forward for our learning team is to really accelerate our shift into digital, right? So I'm sure many learning teams across the nation are starting to go, okay, we've always known that there should be some sort of online asynchronous learning. We even have some of it, but if we were to really look at our active portfolios, what are we managing for?
There you go. It dropped off camera for a sec. And it did it again. There you go.
Okay. So I don't know what happened there. So what our active portfolios, we're not really engaged in how do we truly do digital learning? How do we do asynchronous and synchronous digital learning? And I think this is a huge opportunity to really quickly reskill the way we think about design, development, and deployment of learning, and even the concept of what it is. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, what do you think about this comment? So I've got a strong position on this, and I should study this. Erin, maybe we can do a poll on this next week. But I've got a strong position on this, that I think technical skills can be asynchronous, largely. You don't have to all be. But I think you have to mostly have technical skills asynchronous, basically because with a technical skill, you know you need it, and you think you'll be better, when you have it, right?
Yep.
Whereas with human skills, you tend to not think you need them, and you're sort of scared about what you'll find. And the more you need them, the more you think you don't need them also. And so the self-service of human skills aspect might be hard. So my hypothesis, strong hypothesis, doesn't have to be a full principle, a full rule, but as a principle, asynchronous or, just purely digital, not real time for technical skills, synchronous in some way or social learning in some way for the human skills. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I think this is a really good point, because in the technical learning where you're sort of doing it to do your job, if you will, you have natural built-in practical application where you get feedback from doing your job about how well you're learning, right? So it causes reflection. With the more human-centered skills, your feedback, you might not be able to read it depending on how much you're paying attention and that sort of thing. So while I think you can get the information on human skills asynchronously, reading great articles, maybe from NLI or from other sources, I do think that there's this opportunity for live reflection, right? And being this is where the social learning comes in and sort of designing differently. I don't necessarily have to design an entire learning program to have the reflective conversation with people or give them the opportunity to have a reflective conversation. Yeah. People can have been reading topics for a month, and then we can meet together for an hour and say, okay, what do we think about this?
Right. It can be a blend as well, but I think that there has to be some component. Definitely has to be some component of synchronous, I think. And it's because that's where you get the attention, the insight, the
generation,
personal pressure, generation, all that stuff. I think this is a great segue to bring Shawna back in, and let's talk about the next chapter. Shawna, do you want to come back on? Fantastic. There you are. And I'm going to just share screen just a little moment, I think.
While you're doing that, I just want to comment. I agree so much. And I think that there is something so special there that we need to think about building in this go forward in a new way to sort of prime and ask for the feedback that we need to get in order to keep growing and developing and being really, really focused on what it is that we want to get from that interaction and what we want to develop. Yeah. And I think that's going to be an interesting opportunity in the very near term because of how we're interacting differently and through this digital mechanism. So how I show up now might even be exacerbated in a way that, or it could show up differently. I think that might be something to dig into as we figure out how to ask for feedback in a different way, prime for folks to look for it and then give it back.
Well, there's a crazy thing now. You could actually, like I was imagining this terrifying solution we could roll out and scare the heck out of people, is that we could Zoom bomb like your whole company's meetings and give you feedback on your managers and like, secret, we'd have to get agreement, but we could, you know, basically be there, watch how managers run meetings and give them like really detailed feedback of all the accidental threats they create unnecessarily, what they could have said differently, you know, all the biases.
Talk about creating threat.
Yeah, all the biases that came up, you know, and we probably could teach AI to do that, which is even scarier. But, you know, if everything's, you know, on these platforms, it opens up some crazy opportunities. But anyway, let's not terrify everyone. So I guess the first question, firstly, it's great to have you both. I know I've worked with both of you at different organizations before, and I know both of you have kind of worked with NLI's work for a long time in different ways. What are you, you know, like what's inspiring you about rethinking learning right now, like the kind of opportunity of it? What's exciting about kind of this opportunity with going virtual?
I think you've hit on a couple of things, you know, being able to be innovative, and I think the shift to being radically digital. Any learning strategy and the way you think about learning, I believe needs to be mapped to the strategy of the company and make sure that you're helping your company achieve its goals and its objectives. And then how do we do it differently? So as we transform digitally at Comcast, and very quickly now, how do we shift our thinking around learning and how we develop and grow frontline, et cetera, in a digital way that's just as powerful as meeting in person?
Yeah, fantastic. And actually better. So I'm going to say something controversial, but I have data, I have insight and data and tons of experience that actually doing learning virtually the right way is dramatically better than doing it in person. And if you get the framing right, the kind of first principles right, and some tactical things right, you can massively reduce the costs and accelerate the impact in a virtual world. And while everyone might not always be virtual like this, everyone's going to be able to be on platforms forever, right? Yeah. So you can always say, hey, we're doing this virtual experience now, and you are going to spend an hour a week or a month, whatever, on Zoom with your peers. They're all used to that now.
Yeah, we've probably had like the greatest advancement in human skills around digital that we've ever had, right? In the last 8 weeks or so.
Yeah, right. Interesting. And what about for you, Melanie? What's inspiring for you about this, you know, this potential shift around learning?
Oh, I'm just really excited to sort of have to let go of our old favorites. So we you know, intellectually we know, okay, we can't just have in-person learning. Intellectually, we know there's lots of opportunity for digital. We've read all of that. We know all of it, but we all have our old favorites. And it's both learning professionals and learners themselves that are like, no, I learn best in person, right? It's that we're totally biased. I also enjoy designing in person best because you get a happy hour in that case that's, you know, usually paid for by the company. So like with all of that being true, what I am really inspired about and looking forward to over the next 6 months is really being forced to become extremely creative and innovative without having our old habits and biases being able to get in the way to tell us a new story. That's I'm super excited about that.
Fantastic. That's great. I mean, what do you think some of the first principles need to be? Some of your design principles? Tell me your kind of working hypotheses on, you know, if you're going to reinvent it all, what are some of your design principles? And I'm throwing questions we never even talked about.
I know, I'm like, that was not, so I think one of,
right?
Yeah, I know, right? I think one of the key ones for me, and this is super important, I think this is why virtual is more effective actually, and that's why the research shows that, is that when you're designing for this format, you're really talking about cognitive capacity. So you're only designing just enough to get you through to the next day, which allows you to get to that spacing and allows you to have that attention. You're not doing a 2 to 4 day long experience. And I think that's one of the design principles that will really make this more effective and sticky long-term, is making sure you just have enough. It's just enough. It's not too much.
What's happening is you're attenuating the signal, right? So you're not focused on the chairs, the layout, the food, the, you know, lighting, it's like what you're focused on is actually the thing that creates learning, which is attention. You focus on, do I have people's attention? And now that I have their attention, are we changing something, right? Which is insight, right? So are we creating strong insight? Now, those things are super measurable. You can actually measure how much attention you have and how strong the insights are, right? And then are people now, like, you know, being willing to set actions, and are they taking those actions? Again, you can measure that. So you can actually test things because you're kind of like a science experiment, removing variables.
Yeah.
Just getting back to, you know, did we move people in that 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever? It's interesting.
And not only can you test them quickly, but you can iterate quickly. So in this format, it's very easy to really blow it. And then on your very next one, do it better. Because you don't have to reprint everything and you don't have to, you know, so reset up your room, order new furniture or whatever it might be.
And getting really focused on what you're teaching and what you need folks to do from building habits and showing up with their behavior. I think so many times when you have these long periods of time where you have a classroom, everyone throws their thing that they want to have hit on it. And now it's like, cut out the stuff that's unnecessary. Let's get really focused and deliberate on what we want you to do. Again, that attenuation of focus, I think, is key. And then if it's just in those short spurts using AGES model, that's brilliant.
Yeah. No, so AGES for newbies is a framework it's a really powerful architecture for understanding basically how you design learning. It's the 4 conditions that have to be all very high for learning to stick. And maybe we could, one of my team can put in the chat one of the pieces from ATT or somewhere on that. But basically,
I geeked out on the terms.
Right, it's even better that you write it down as I explain it. You'll learn more if you actually write it down because you'll pay more attention if you're writing, and you'll generate your own connections, which is the G. And your emotionals will be higher if you're actually trying to get it, because you'll be anxious about not getting it versus just reading it. And then the spacing effect will be there because you'll know where this paper is and you can see it again, right? So what actually has to happen with learning is that all of these 4 have to be really high, like really high for learning to stick. Very high attention. And to be honest, in the classroom, you only have high attention for a short amount of time because it gets tiring learning. So you don't have 6 hours of attention. You have like 1 or 2. In a classroom. Generation means literally making connections. Emotions have to actually be high, which by the way is easier to do with negative emotions than positive. Now you want to switch to positive, but it's actually, you know, people will learn a lot more if the facilitator of 20 people says every one of you is going to be called on 3 times in the next hour randomly, and everyone goes, oh my God, I can't believe that. Hates you for a while, and at the end of it goes, wow, I really paid attention more than I ever had, right? Now attention's up, right? But emotions are negative, but strong. That's actually important for learning. Now you want to give people some positive experiences, maybe at the end to kind of do it. But people make the mistake that learning should be fun. Actually, it should generate strong emotions. And then the spacing, this is the biggest mistake people make. We didn't realize how big the spacing effect was till we started experimenting 7 years ago. We always, you know, the research says it can have a pretty big effect, you know, 25% effect, 50% effect. From what we're seeing, we think it's much, much more. That we don't have data, we can't state anything. But the spacing effect, particularly if you use it a certain way, can be enormous. So one aspect of spacing is just kind of, you know, when you come back to something and reanimate the network, you're growing memories through additional, additional attention. So, you know, because memories are grown, not stored. So that's part of it. But if you can like get people to learn something and then have them have to go and teach it to their team, right? And then come back in a week or a month and tell them they're going to have to present out what happened, right? Now you've got spacing and social learning and positive pressure. And by the way, that thing they have to teach their people is going to keep coming up almost every day for the whole month. So there's ways of leveraging spacing where you're also leveraging attention and emotion, you know, and all this other stuff. That's really, really powerful. So that's AGES. How are you experimenting with social learning? So, you know, we've been talking a lot about social learning, and, you know, we would define it as, you know, you're not just learning something on your own, you're actually learning with others, preferably synchronously, but not necessarily. But how have you been experimenting with social learning or want to experiment with social learning? Maybe Shawna first?
Sure. We're thinking about, well, as we've done a shift, all of our focus really has been getting our learning out of the classroom and into a virtual space. And so social learning, I'd say, has always been a part of what we've done. It's just a bit of a shift in the modality or the technology, and then getting focused about how we learn afterwards, which is really what you were just talking about. So how do we continue the learning over time, bringing back what my insights have been from attending something or experiencing something, and then sharing that. So we have a platform that we just developed called ULearn, which was really originally intended to have folks learn, our teammates learn about our products. But we've expanded that just a little bit to be able to have users who have generated their own insights to be able to post their reflections online, and then we can share those and interact in a different way than we have before.
Thanks, Shawna. What about for you, Melanie? How have you been experimenting with social learning, or you want to? How are you thinking about that?
So we have a couple things that are coming up. So one, of course, is we are doing something that Ford has not ever done before, which is we're going to do a Hive with NLI for our top 300 leaders. So later this month or in June, we're going to be doing basically the cohorts of about 30 people doing these 1-hour calls to really start talking about leadership kind of in this new format as we start our return to the workplace initiatives and begin production of vehicles again, and not just PPE. So very excited about that part of social learning. This is something that our leadership hasn't ever done before. The other thing that I'm super excited to try is this. So that's more formal. The next one is more informal. And this is where I think growing our portfolio strategy has to happen as part of the digital transformation, is to say, hey, we're using a platform called Agreed, taking a look at the analytics and seeing what content people are drawn to, and then inviting them to a 1 hour, 90-minute kind of almost brown bag type session, just to say, hey, what did you learn and how have you applied it? And really, those are the two things. And getting to a point where we can have our leaders come in as, quote, teachers or facilitators of that conversation to build networking connections. And that's like no design, right? That takes some logistics and that's it. So pretty excited about that.
Yeah, fantastic. I want to answer one of the questions that came up. And folks, please feel free to put questions in the chat. I'm going to start to look at them as well. I'll answer some of those questions. A few people asking about the data showing learning can be better if it's virtual than not. We haven't published a formal paper on that yet. I'll tell you the data we have, and then I'll give you the thought experiment that makes it really obvious. But the data we have is we took hundreds of people in one company, in one training, one set of content, and we delivered it completely virtually through what we call a distributed learning solution. And we delivered it in workshop format. Same content, basically same ideas. And if anything, if you looked at the amount of time and exercises and practice and all this stuff, you'd say, well, actually the workshop had way more time, like 2 or 3 times the amount of like focus time and everything than the distributed virtual, right? And so you'd bet that the workshop would be better. And now we don't believe in happy sheets and NPS and all that for learning. We ask one question, which is what percentage of people are applying, the central habit a month or so later? We look at, if you're trying to get people to mitigate bias, what percentage of your target audience of 50 or 5,000 are actually mitigating bias at least once a week? What percentage of that? If it's growth mindset, what percentage of people are catching a mindset, shifting it, so we just look at that, which is measuring habits, right? And so the percentage was radically better. I don't have the number on top of my head, but the percentage was very statistically significantly better for the scalable distributed solution that was virtual than it was for the workshops. And you sort of look at it and you dig in, you're like, how would that work? Because it's literally like an hour and a half of content versus, like a whole day. How's that possible? And now I'll give you the thought experiment. If you take, and we should, people are like nudging me, encouraging me to like, now we should, study this more. But if you take, say, let's say growth mindset, right? You put people into a workshop, most you'll get 2 days. That's rare. Probably get a day. In that day, what you do, you've got lots of opportunity to generate things, but the problem is you're learning all of it in one day. And in terms of applying habits, we can't build like tons of habits all at once. We actually need to build like one habit at a time. And so you give people kind of all the habits all in one day, all these ideas, and they go away just kind of overwhelmed with very little support structure. But if instead you say, let's break that up into 3 ideas, and let's give, let's call it a Zoom, a 50-minute Zoom. Let's give people a 50-minute Zoom on one of those ideas, and then they've got to now spend a whole week applying that and teaching their people, right? And talking to people about it and assessing themselves and stuff. So they've got a whole week on one habit, and they know that they're going to be called on in front of their peers to report out on what they did. So they really do it. Not everyone, but like 90%. And then the next week you come back and you teach one new habit. So what you end up with is like a month of really focusing a lot on one habit at a time. Now, it's compared to an intense day and like a few days afterwards where they're focusing intensely and then it peters out. So it like over the month, they have not just the focus, but people kind of forcing them to focus. So that's, the thought experiment that, when you kind of break things into chunks, spread it out, get people to apply and kind of come back together, it's modeling the best aspects of coaching. It's modeling the kind of great parts of coaching. Shawna, do you want to speak to that, or Melanie, just any sort of insights or questions on, on that approach overall?
Go ahead, Mel.
Thumbs up for you.
Sure, I can, Shawna. So as you were talking, I was thinking about how, and I've seen a couple things in the chat that are like, virtual is the most effective. I don't know. What about the in-person? And I think what we're saying here is that virtual is incredibly effective for all of these reasons. And as a learning professional, what I have observed is that we've really built up this muscle of in-person learning. We know how to do it. We're very familiar with it. And honestly, we get to a point where we have a bias with it, right? We like it. It feels good, all of those things. What I was saying about like what we get to do for the next 6 months is really build up the muscle of what David's talking about here, which is what do we optimize for when we do it virtually, right? We're optimizing for spacing. We're optimizing for practice. We're optimizing for cognitive capacity. We're optimizing for just in time. We're optimizing for the fact people don't have to drive anywhere to do it. We're optimizing for all of those things. And my hope is that as we start to conceive of our long-term strategy for our portfolios, that we really think about all of these muscles because they optimize for different things. And so when we learn in person, we're optimizing for network, we're optimizing for relatedness, we're optimizing for some five senses experiences, right? But our tool of virtual learning should be no less sharp as our tool of in-person learning, and we can probably use it more because there's more.
That's a good point. And I think companies will still will want to go back to in-person learning. Here's the funny thing. We've actually had some situations where companies have seen the data and seen that the virtual learning is way better. And they've said, you know what, but we like the other one. And literally people like the in-person learning more. They rate it higher, but they learn more in the other one.
Right.
So that's your challenge.
So what are you optimizing for, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can get more focused. I mean, what I love about virtual is that you can be really intentional about what habit that you want to build. And I think there are ways to build in that relatedness piece. And I think we're going to be learning about that even more as we go forward, and you'll have the research together with the practical that you're going to try out and test and learn, and then just continue to develop it. And I think the technology that we have is going to allow for it in different ways too, where you have breakout groups and cohorts where you're just meeting in a different way, but you still can make those connections. The thing that we always, I think, get back from the in-person, like the number one is, I built my network, I met people, I got to have coffee with, somebody that I'd never met with before. And so how do we capture that goodness and making those connections in virtual? And that'll probably end up being a secret sauce. And
I think you can. I'll just say, I think you can. It's like small group, like breakout groups, but then also pair people up with a different person each time, each interaction. Like you got to do 15-minute Skype call with these 3 people this week, one-on-one, and practice this thing. And then like you actually can do it. I think there are ways to solve for it. We do need to wrap up. Just thank you so much for joining us. Lots of inspiring thoughts on learning and leadership. And I think, in this time, we need to support people all sorts of crazy ways. And I think, the learning function is more popular than it's ever been because people want to learn right now, right? People want to learn. Let's use that moment and give them incredibly effective tools for learning that are completely reimagined from the science. I think that's the opportunity here for all of us. Let's reimagine learning completely for a world where people are hungry for it, but also are overwhelmed. Let's reimagine it in a way that really follows how the brain works. So look forward to connecting with you guys down the track. Thanks again for being here. I'm just going to make a bunch of announcements to wrap up and get some more data from people actually. So maybe stay around for that. I actually want to put another poll up. It's the final poll. Can we do that, Erin? Let's get the final poll up. And maybe we can have a quick comment on it as well. What are you doing with learning now? Cancelled, all almost, paused and still deciding, significantly innovating on content and delivery, significantly innovating on delivery. What are you doing with learning? See if we can get a couple of hundred of you answering this. If you're not doing anything with learning, that's fine. Give people a moment. Fantastic. Let's wrap that up in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's wrap that up. Fantastic. Thanks very much. Wow, look at that. 50% significantly innovating on content and delivery. Amazing. Thanks very much for everyone for doing that. I want to put a couple of slides up, a couple of announcements I think you'll appreciate because they're free things that are kind of awesome. One of them is, firstly, if you're from an organization and you're in the talent function, if you're from an organization and talent function, we're running these free events. We've had 12 of them so far. They're happening every week. They're awesome. You get to learn a ton from your peers. And just put in the chat insider exchange if you're interested in that. But it is restricted to people from organizations. But we have ones on D&I, we have ones on leadership, we have ones on performance. I'm doing an overview one actually every week as well. So if you haven't come to one of those, check it out. We get really richly into the things that you're thinking about and supporting each other through that. Just put insider exchange in the chat now and someone will follow up with you. Or you can email anyone for that. Secondly, we are now offering free briefings on building the better normal. It needs to be C-suite, could be chief learning officer at least, but chief learning officer, chief talent officer, CHRO, CFO, but we're offering free C-suite briefings on building the better normal. We've got a point of view on that middle chunk on what do we need to do. If you're interested in that, put build the better normal briefing. And we'll reach out to you and work out how to do that. We've got lots of these coming up. Build a better normal briefing. Again, that's if you're from an organization, but we'll spend either 30 or 60 minutes as you can spare to walk you through the science of how we think this is happening, building the better normal. And the third one is a free learning strategy audit. So this one is where we look at what your current learning strategy is and we give you advice on how you can radically save money and make it more effective. We're not selling any specific solution. We're literally giving you some free consulting, free feedback. So if you're interested in that, put free learning strategy audit. So we're experimenting massively, quickly. We're adapting, evolving, trying things. So, this is something we're trying for a few weeks. We'll see how it goes. So you can pick any of those. Also, I mentioned the focus program. If you're from an organization, we can give you a free place in one of our open enrollment focus programs coming up as well. A couple of things that we're doing to help organizations. We're still reinventing culture, learning, and performance. We're doing a lot on growth mindset, inclusion. We're also doing a lot of custom habit activation strategies. So a lot of building plans for developing leaders. And lots of individuals still coming to us. Our brain-based coaching is full. We've had some incredible interest in that. There's a 6-month certificate program as well. And that's it. Just thank you very much for being here. Gabe, any closing comments before I wrap up? But finally, just a big thank you to Shawna and Melanie. Really appreciate your insights, energy, positivity. And thanks everyone for being here. Back to you, Gabe, for any closing comments.
Thanks a lot, David. And yeah, we have a couple more things we can share if people are willing to stick around for another couple minutes. I just want to echo a really wonderful and warm thanks to Shawna, Melanie, and of course you, David, and for the team in the background that makes all this sort of happen seamlessly. And thanks to all of you for attending and bringing your insights to light on Zoom and LinkedIn Live. It's always very educational for us to hear what's going on in your worlds. A couple of additional reminders before we let you go. If you'd like to watch this webinar again or share it with colleagues, recording will be made available by end of business today. So to be sure to fill out that form Mary Grace has been sharing on LinkedIn Live. That follow-up will come out today, probably by around the end of business day from Mary Grace. You can respond to her directly in that email if you want to explore deeper conversations of any of the things David mentioned towards the end of this webinar. You can speak with a client advisor here at NLI. And if you're interested in any additional brain-based perspectives on talent challenges, we have a number of upcoming webinars. Anna Vargas can share that link in the chat now. For instance, we're sharing findings from our growth mindset impact report that David was mentioning earlier. We shared that link in the chat as well. We're doing a demo that's going to review some of those findings as well as talk about how we can operationalize growth mindset in your organization. So you can sign up for that webinar. That'll be next Thursday, next week at around 11 a.m. Eastern. And we run these webinars, not just in North America, but in EMEA and APAC as well. So there's a link where you can sign up and see any of those webinars going on globally. And we also run this series, Your Brain at Work, live every Friday, Eastern, 12 p.m. So we hope to see you back here, as always. And lastly, you can hear all of these Friday webinars on demand because they become, as we mentioned, episodes of our podcast, Your Brain at Work. And you can subscribe to that podcast with another link on it we'll be sharing in the chat. And you can subscribe to any platform of your choice, Spotify, Google, Apple, you name it. I think that brings us to the end. On behalf of the NLI team and all of our panelists today, we wish you continued safety and good health during these times. And we hope to see you next week. Have a great weekend. Bye, everybody.